Second, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed is nay. Thank you very much. We've got two ordinances on final read. Does anybody have any questions about these two items? Or the transportation item? If not, let's move down to resolutions. Madam Clerk, let's go ahead and go with, let's read 7A, please.
A resolution approving short-term vacation rental application number 18 STVR 00005, property located at 4618 Tennessee Avenue.
All right, B, please. Carry on. B, please.
A resolution approving short-term vacation rental application number 18 STVR 0072, property located at 801 South Scenic Highway.
C, please.
A resolution approving short-term vacation rental application number 18 STVR 00087 for property located at 128 West 17th Street.
And D, please.
A resolution approving short-term vacation rental application number 18 STVR 00103 for property located at 501 Tucker Street.
Very well. Thank you, sir. Still see no other lights, so Madam Clerk, let's go ahead and read E, please.
A resolution to confirm the mayor's reappointment of Amy Jenkins and the appointments of Joyce Jackson and Sylvia Ramos to the Chattanooga Department of Youth and Family Development Board.
Okay, F, please.
A resolution to confirm the mayor's appointment of Jenny Simpkins and Holly Richardson to the Wastewater Regulations and Appeals Board.
G, please.
A resolution to confirm the mayor's reappointment of Christopher P. Keene to the Beer and Record Board.
And H.
A resolution to confirm the mayor's reappointment of Ann Wilkins to the Carter Street Corporation.
Mr. Attorney, do you know if the individuals for these particular board seats, are these mayoral appointments, or these council appointments that are being confirmed by the mayor?
I believe these are all reappointments by the mayor, at least that's the reference that we have.
Because I believe Mr. Keene serves in a district.
Yes.
Does anybody? Right. So, but these come by recommendation of council members typically, and I know it's a reappointment, but
Yes, sir.
what about in E? It looks like new appointments, Ms. Jackson and Ramos.
The Department of Youth and Family Development Board on here is a group where there are a number of persons from the council districts as well on there, in that group on there. And then there are specific people that are associated with YFD in connection with that.
Can we just find out if these are individuals that have been recommended by council members, or if they're purely just mayoral?
I will.
And I'd like them noted on here. I mean, Mr. Keene's done a lot of work for a lot of years. It's nice to go ahead and reference what district he represents
Okay.
on this board. I know that. Just trying to pay the guy some props for you, Councilman. All right, thank you, sir.
Yes, sir, will do.
Aye, please.
A resolution authorizing the appointments of Rebecca Baker, Michael Dupree, and Damon Buxton as special police officers unarmed for the Chattanooga Area Regional Transportation Authority to do special duties as prescribed herein, subject to certain conditions.
All right. I see no lights. We have no departmental reports this afternoon. So moving as quickly as we possibly could through our agenda items, and we will now adjourn into Planning and Zoning Committee. Chairman Ledford.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a special edition, early, of the Planning and Zoning Committee meeting. If I can get approval of thank you very much. Has been properly seconded. Hello, Mr. Bridger.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you, sir. Let's go over our planning items on first reading. Do you want to kick us off with
Sure.
6C, please, sir?
Sure, this is a request to rezone a piece of property from R1 residential to RTZ residential townhouse zone to allow for a new townhouse development. As you can see, this property is located next to the intersection of Boy Scout Road and Highway 153, up in the corner, right near where 153 intersects US 27. You can see currently the property is vacant. Around the site, you do have a large vacant tract to the south. To the west, which is on the left-hand side, you see there's one large lot development with a large residential structure on it, and you see some mobile homes further to the north. So that's the land use pattern of the area. I show this slide again to provide an illustration of this site. As you know, we presented several weeks ago about development patterns. This is on a site that's got some steep slopes on it. It's on a ridge that runs right alongside of Highway 153. This shows you the zoning pattern of the area. Currently, it is zoned R1. You do have some commercial zoning across the street, and you do have an R3 mobile home park development to the north. There has been no recent history of zoning on this site, and as we noticed, this property was annexed in the city of Chattanooga back in 2000, and it was zoned R3 for mobile home park. Currently, there's no precedence for RTZ zoning at this location. This is the site plan that was submitted. Again, shows you the proposal to build, which you see depicted there, 24 townhouses on this particular piece of property, with one point of access coming off of Boy Scout Road. It should be noted that there is a property back behind it that, as I recall, after this, or while this application was submitted, the applicant was in the process of potentially acquiring that property to the rear. So let me show you here. If you see on the slide, you see the flat end on the south side, but behind that is another property, which would be preferable for that property to use the same point of access that this property would be to access Boy Scout Road. So that was something that staff was interested in. If we do rezone or redevelop this property, to create an opportunity to extend the road so you could also provide access to the parcel behind it. Otherwise, you might end up landlocking that property, or it has more problems for access. You can see there is a little small flag. You can see that small little line just to the right that runs up to the site that accesses that property. You can see it more closely here. You can see the little flag. Currently would be the only access point for that larger tract behind it. The land use plan recommends low-density residential, which is the Hickson River North River Area Plan. But that includes townhouses if the density is compatible. And looking at this location, because it is right next to Highway 153 at a major intersection, you've got some commercial zoning at this location or across the street. Staff did not have an issue with an RTZ zone at this location. So staff found that there's already a mix of uses in the area, so it's compatible with adjacent land uses. We also feel like there's already a variety of development patterns in this area, including commercial structures, mobile homes, and so adding townhouses would not be seen as something that's inconsistent with the development pattern of this area. So we recommended approval, subject to some conditions, because there is some steep slopes on this site. So our recommended conditions were to limit it to no more than 24 units as proposed, no more than 6 buildings. We added a condition of no grading, land disturbance, or building shall be permitted above the 740-foot topo. I'm going to show you what that looks like on a map here in a minute. But no grading above that line. Type B landscaping along the southern and western property line, and a road stub, whereas before, go back to the site plan, you can see that they basically had the road stopping and not continuing to the property to the left. Staff was wanting to see that right away end at the end of the property so you could continue the road further south. So those are the conditions that staff recommended. Again, here is a zoom in of the site showing that 740 topo line in green. So that's where you've got your 30% plus grade slopes on the site. So if approved, that condition would have no grading allowed to the above that line. When Planning Commission heard the case, the applicant brought to their attention, the potential of assembling that property to the south. And so they went ahead and basically said, well, if the adjacent property is purchased as part of this development, limit the total number of units to no more than 30 units and 8 buildings for both parcels combined. No grading, a land disturbance shall be above that 740 topo line. And you see the rest of the conditions as part of that recommendation. So it comes with a recommendation approved from both Planning Commission and staff with conditions. There's no opposition.
Very good. Thank you, John. And as anticipated, I do have a light. Councilman Henderson, please.
Thank you, sir. John, I know, and this is another prime example of trying to develop on a steep slope. And our steep slope policy / ordinance is probably a little ways away from having it developed. Is there a way that we could develop some language in the interim that could help guide us in responsible development?
You could, and then I've already had some conversation with staff looking at potential ordinance tools or ways of kind of addressing steep slope development.
Well, and let me say steep slopes and our
And
floodplains.
floodplains,
I'm
sure.
gonna try to,
Sure, you could, I mean, again, based on if you wanted to look at some kind of an interim set of limitations to help kind of address things going forward until we adopt the full-term solution. As I understand it from my conversations with our city attorney, it could be like a resolution. They would have to have some kind of a sunset clause, so
okay.
be at a specific time. And again, if you wanted, as a baseline, based on my conversations with LDO staff, we're thinking there's really 3 types of things you probably want to look at. One is no more than 20% disturbance of steep slopes that are 30% or greater. And I've got some of our engineer staff here. When you get to 30% and above, that's where you really have problems with stabilization.
Right.
So that would certainly help them on the permitting side. So if you limited it to no more than 20% grading on a 30% grade or higher slope, I think if you do that with the 50% limitation of fill, which again is pretty well established already in Knoxville and Chattanooga, Knoxville and Nashville. And then I think the third item, as I understand from talking to staff, is making sure that when you do if you're doing any grading within that steep slope, to make sure you put a retaining wall up before you do any residential construction. That's my understanding of the 3 things that staff. So if you want to do that as kind of like a holding pattern,
Right.
Up until we develop the full ordinance, that's fine.
Is that something you could have to us next week, Mr. Chairman, if we could have maybe another planning and zoning committee meeting?
Actually, John, do you think November 20th?
30th, I thought was whatever the week. I think it would be helpful because a couple of things. Well, I know you need 2 weeks to get on the agenda, and we need to get back with you on the results from the public hearing. So I was thinking the 30th, but I know the issue with that though would be.
Well, now the third, we got a 27th.
Yeah, I think.
I'm sorry,
I think it's-
27th. Sorry, whatever the week of Thanksgiving is.
27th?
Yeah, that Tuesday.
Now, well, let me understand what you're telling me.
Sure.
What would happen on the 27th? We'd start talking about it?
We would
Or-
present you some language per your request of a proposed interim resolution. Now, we can go ahead and draft it right on the agenda, but I would think you would not want to take action on it for at least a couple weeks after that. Are you wanting to take action sooner?
Well, I would,
Personally, I was hoping we could do it on the 20th,
yeah.
Okay. So that is, let me look at my schedule.
if it pleases the council. Well,
Okay, so then we would need to brief you on that next week.
That's what I was asking, if it was possible for you. to-
We'll figure out a way.
Okay.
great, so
Can we bring that before planning and
Yeah.
zoning next week?
that'd be great. Madam Clerk, can we make sure we're listed for a Planning and Zoning Committee meeting on the 20th, immediately following our agenda session?
13th.
The 13th.
Sorry.
And just to be sure I understand you correctly, that's kind of like an interim set of standards until the full tool is developed, and there'll be some kind of a
On the 20th.
sunset.
Okay, so
Of
John,
that.
let me make sure we're clear. So
Sure.
you're going to try and present next week on the 13th.
That is correct.
Okay, that's very good. 13th. I understand. Is that wishes of the council? Looking around. I'm seeing
We'll get
wondrous
busy.
applause, so we will go with that.
So just to emphasize, that's an interim
That's
set
correct.
of
That's correct.
requirements until the full ordinance is developed.
Something that would have a sort of a sunset clause.
Yep. Okay.
Is that all you need?
Yep.
On the heels of that, you know what, I'm going to let Councilman Mitchell, I think you had a comment. I'm going to let you before I follow up on that item. If you would, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you answered what my first question would have been, is the difference between the staff version and the first version recommended approval by council. It's our planning commission. The commission just added that in case they, is that the
Assembled
only
that
difference?
property.
Yeah,
Right,
okay.
to the left, yes.
Okay, that answered that question. When you're talking about building a retaining wall before you start residential construction, is one of the items. At one point, I believe in some of our conversations, we were talking about requiring a geotechnical engineer stamp
Mm-hmm.
on those plans. So could that be part of it?
I'm Tony Kendra, I'm the site development manager. Right now, we currently require on slopes that are 3-to-1 or greater than 3-to-1 slopes, we already currently require that, and we would in the future as well. And the only reason we'd requested this about the wall being put in before the house, we've had more than one case of where they will go out and build the house, and they will move the house real close, and you might have a 20-foot just sheer cut face, and then it'd be like 8 to 10 feet off the back of the house, and then they'll come back and say, we can't build a retaining wall there now. And
Yeah,
it's just
I drive by
costly.
about 3 of those every day.
Yes, sir. And so that's what we're trying to prevent with that. So-
Okay.
So it should not be any problem anything.
All right, thank you.
And one, just new clarification, I've looked at just and just remembered. On this request, we had some landscape buffering requirements, which I don't think would be needed if we are protecting the upper slope in terms of grading. I don't know that that's really needed in terms of buffering. And as I understand, you're going to be, they secured the property to the south, do you know? Okay, it's a work in progress? Okay, so anyway, since we're protecting, and that's something I'll discuss more with council at the following week, but since if we're going to be protecting that slope on the upper side, I don't think that we need to require that buffer requirement. As you see there, it says, I'm gonna look at the conditions. Let me get my notes, give me 1 second. I should pull up on the screen. I see here. Type B landscaping along the southern and western property line, because if you already got a no, I just don't see the value out of that. Okay, any questions? Not at all.
I'm seeing no lights. John, before we move on
Yes,
to our
sir.
next case, I want to mention that the items that we are reading and going over this afternoon are going to be on next week's agenda session, our agenda meeting, or our council meeting at 6 o'clock.
Okay.
Let me point out real quick, if I may, the reason that, I want to make a couple of things. When we're working on this language for I guess we'll call it a temporary restrictions for, to address the steep slopes and floodplains, that we will make sure and that the public and the developers know that we will be implementing and fully authorizing and upholding Section 3835.
Right.
So those folks who may think that somehow we're trying to prohibit things from moving forward with this
Right.
is not actually the case, that we will be, and I know that the city
Vested.
attorneys, we're going to make sure that that's also covered in our language, if you want to address that real quick.
Yes, sir. Currently, under our code, we have to comply with the steep slopes provisions that are in place in a couple of different places. They're in the zoning ordinance under 38-25. There's also provisions about landfilling requirements under the stormwater provisions in the code as well.
Right.
And we are looking at the requirements there whenever you're talking about slopes in excess of 3-to-1 here. Currently, there's a number of regulations that have to be done. We're simply trying to get an opportunity to have a little bit of a brief spell to look at these to see whether any of those need to be fine-tuned or not.
Very good. I just want to make sure that's made clear to the public, because I know we will probably receive some emails from folks thinking their projects are maybe in jeopardy, but this will be upheld according to our city codes. Any other questions on what we're trying to accomplish with steep slopes and floodplains? I want to thank the staff very much for taking that on, because I know that's putting a heavy workload on you for getting this done, but I think it's very important. I've heard from several council members say on the dais how important it is, and I appreciate y'all willing to take that task on, and I appreciate this council willing to take this on. It's very important that we get it right, and I think we're moving in the direction that we need to move into. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Okay. Next item on our agenda is 6D, John?
Yes, this is a request to rezone a portion of a property. I'm going to emphasize a portion. This is not the entire property. Let me show you the parcel line. This is just that portion of the property. This is off of, again, 153, just north of the Grub Road intersection. It's the portion of the property that directly fronts onto 153. So the back portion of the property on Wilder Road, would remain zoned R2. So this is not the entire tract, just a portion of it. But they're wanting to, again, rezone a portion of it to accommodate a 4,000 square foot commercial building. As I indicated in my earlier remarks, it's located at 6100 Wilder Lane, but it fronts on Highway 153. You can see that based on the site, this aerial map, that it's currently vacant. There is some residential to the east of this property and to the north of this property, but it is also on a major commercial thoroughfare. So again, as I noted before, the property is currently zoned R2. You've got R2 zoning to the east, C2 zoning across the street to the west, and you got R4 to the north. There has been no recent rezoning request at this site. There is a large tract of land to the south that was rezoned in 2006. That was for what we know now as Oaks, what's the name of it? Large Walmart Super Shopping Center. I should know the name of it. Oh, thank you. Oaktown, I should have known that. Development with a number of conditions. So again, there is some precedence for commercial zoning around this site and location. Again, this site plan shows the property, the intention to access off of 153, parking located to the front and side. There would be no development of the R2 to the rear. The Hickson River North plan recommends medium business mix for this site. So that would include, again, your typical commercial that you would find along a commercial highway, and it would be appropriate for any kind of C5, C2, O1, or R4 zone. This is just a rendering indicating, again, a potential concept for the development of this site. So staff in reviewing this request found that the proposal is compatible with the adjacent land uses and the recommendations of the plan. The development form along this corridor is predominantly commercial. You do have, there are some residential structures to the rear, but again, this property is oriented to 153, so staff found it was compatible with the development form up and down 153. So our recommendation was to approve based on its compatibility with the adopted plan, adjacent uses and development form along 153. What we did recommend a condition, because you want to limit the number of curb cuts on 153, so you're not having a lot of entry and exit at multiple points along that road. It's very heavily traveled, so limit to no more than one curb cut. At Planning Commission, there was opposition, and the main, I think the questions and concerns from the community had to deal with what was going to happen with the R2 property behind it. So that was their primary concern looking at this rezoning request. But after hearing from the applicant, staff's recommendation, and the comments from the public, recommended to approve it, noting it was compatible with the adopted land use plan and the form of the area. So they concurred with staff's recommendation to approve with that one condition.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Bridger. I have no other lights, no lights at all, actually, on this one. So if we'll move on to E, please.
Okay. This is a request on let me show you my notes here. Yeah, on Winding Hills Lane to rezone an existing duplex from R1 to R2 to make it comply with our zoning code. If you look at the land use pattern on this street, they're already, let me go, if I jump here, so you can see the structure. It's already an existing duplex. As you can see from this photo, There are several existing duplexes on this cul-de-sac, so this is not something new. It's an established development form for this area. It just came out of compliance with zoning. Okay, going back to the zoning, let me go back to my zoning map. Here you can see, again, you got R2 zoning to the north. This is just one parcel that's not zoned R2. You do have R1 zoning to the east, south, and west, but this property is oriented towards Winding Hills Lane. We should note that the property does not have, basically it uses a private easement to access onto the Winding Hills right-of-way. It does not front on a public right-of-way. This is showing you the zoning history of the area. In 1996, it was rezoned from R1 to R2 residential zone. Staff recommended deny, but Planning Commission and Council approved. Just showing again that the area was annexed in 1972. This area was recommended for low-density residential by the Hickson North River Plan. As a reminder, that low-density residential recommendation includes townhouses and duplexes if the density is compatible. In this case, since you've already got a pattern of duplexes on the street, staff didn't have any concerns about approving an R2 zone request at this location. Here's the site plan that was provided. So again, staff found that the use was compatible with adjacent land uses. There are already existing duplexes in the area. It's compatible with the development form. And since you've already got those two-family dwellings at this location, it would bring that existing use into conformity, and so it could be occupied. So staff recommended that we approve the request subject to the condition that access to this parcel needs to come from Winding Hills Lane. And I think what we're trying to emphasize there is they need to figure out a way to get right-of-way frontage onto Winding Hills Lane for it to be compliant. So staff recommended approval. There was no opposition at Planning Commission. Planning Commission concurred with staff's recommendation to approve with that condition.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Bridger. Councilman Mitchell, I see your light. I just wanted to give Chairman Smith one chance since that's his district. You're good? All right. Councilman Mitchell.
Just a question of reference. Were these units built before the city annexed this? Okay, all right, thank you.
Yes.
Very good. Good, Councilman?
Yes.
Very good. Seeing no other lights, F, please.
Okay. This is a request to rezone from C2 Convenience Commercial and R4 Special Zone to an M1 Manufacturing Zone for a future building expansion and contractor laydown storage area. This is located, got several of these up in the northern Hickson area, several different council districts involved. Inside baseball there. This was formerly a athletic club. It has since become vacant. There is a contractor, electrical contractor, who's trying to reuse the building for their employees, but they also have outdoor storage. That's where we have, I just kind of be clear about the zoning. In C2, you can have limited use for contractor uses, but it can only be up to 5 employees. They're going to have more than that at this site, and they're going to have some outdoor storage. So that creates issues with using C2 as a zone for this. So their initial request was for M1. After talking some with the LDO staff, we determined actually M2 zoning could work for this site as opposed to M1. And just for your reference, to make sure you understand the difference, M2 is more of your, what I call your light manufacturing. Think of Bonnie Oaks, your warehousing, not your heavy stuff. M1 allows your chicken plants, your foundries, your more noxious type uses. So we did determine that M2 could be a zone tool that's used for this request as opposed to M1. Nonetheless, when we reviewed this request, here again, you can see the building. Let me go forward. Here you see the zoning of the area. It's currently zoned a mix of C2 and R4, that site is. You do have a neighborhood to the rear of this structure to the east. That's where there was a lot of concerns. There were several community meetings, which Councilman Henderson can share with council about, that I was also at last night. There's some concerns about the rezoning request, and I'll let him convey that. But you do see a mix of zones. You see commercial zoning, R2 zoning, R3 zoning at this location. However, there are no manufacturing zones at this location. There is an M3 about 1,500 feet to the south of this location, but not in this immediate area. So let me jump forward to the plan recommendation. The Hickson North River Plan recommends medium business mix. So again, that's more your highway commercial type uses. It's not industrial or warehousing type uses. So the plan does not call for a warehousing or a heavy industrial type use at this location. This is the site plan that was provided. The site plan shows, I know it's a little hard to read because it's faded out, but the existing building is on the right-hand side of the parcel. You can see the parking in front, which they're going to retain the existing parking in the front, but they'll build a new building to the left, which is to the north. Actually, it's to the east, actually, technically. But anyway, to the left, they're building a new building, and the storage is going to be in between. So again, because of the outdoor storage, that's where you can't have any kind of commercial zone. It had to be an M2 or M1 type zone for that to happen. So staff, in looking at this, because it was a request for M1 at the time, felt that the use was not compatible with the adjacent uses, as well as the recommendations of the plan. So we recommended to deny. At PC, there was opposition. That's incorrect. There was opposition. People had some concerns of this request, but after hearing the comments from the public, the Planning Commission determined that the proposal was compatible with the development form and adjacent land uses of the area, and they recommended to approve with 2 conditions: the use for contractor's office and laydown storage area, and building expansion related to the contractor's office only. I know that's a lengthy statement, but that's essentially the proposed use. So basically, the Planning Commission sought to do was approve it subject to that use only and providing a 70-foot buffer to the rear of the site. Since that, there has been a community meeting. I'll stop there. I don't know if Councilman Henderson wants to add any more to what I've ever shared at this point.
I feel like I need to throw this one up in the air and see who grabs it, so, but I do have a light for Councilman Henderson. I'm going to back off the mic here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Golly. Something changed. John, last night at the meeting, and I didn't intentionally groan Mr. Smith here, but if I'd have certainly known it was his district, I would have backed off. There was some mention last night about maybe creating a special permit in order to allow an operation like this to exist in C2. From what I heard last night, the majority of the residents were very concerned with rezoning this to M1 and sort of setting a precedence for this area. They were concerned about what it could potentially do to their home values. They did not seem to have a problem with the C2, which is what it's zoned now. But obviously they can't, and the applicant has no problem, obviously, with it staying C2. They're just not able to do what they need to do in a C2 without creating some kind of special permit. And we were talking about, the sort of the timing of the special permit and how that would unfold. Is it possible to create another tool for our toolbox that would let us have a special permit to allow operations like this to operate in C2?
What I would follow up, actually, with a question for you all as council, because then that'll drive us to staff. Because what I think we're asking, and if I'll just give you what staff initial review of this and some of the concerns they had. C2, as you know, is primarily intended for retail sales or restaurants and services. And one of the current limitations is not having a lot of outdoor storage, because the idea was try to limit that so you don't have a lot of stuff out in an area that can be seen or, that we're at the screen. And I know Dallas and LDO, they get complaints sometimes from folks who have outdoor storage, and so there's a desire to limit that. So I think here's what you got to think about as you think about this potential approach. If, clearly, when you prove its tool, it would be something anybody could apply for in any location. So what you're giving thought to, is it okay, like the other special permits in C2, that this could be inappropriate in a particular location? It should be a case-by-case basis and approved as a special permit, right? So that's one choice, to say, you know what, we're going to have situations where it's a case-by-case review. In some cases, we'll approve it. Some cases, we won't, because it may not work in a particular area. The other option is, of course, is the status quo, which is, you know what, we just don't want to see this at all in C2. We're concerned about outdoor storage. We don't want to allow it at all at C2, and so you really got to think about I guess, requiring folks to do more of that kind of activity in an M2 or M1 zone area. You see where I'm going?
Yeah,
To me, it's for y'all as council to tell us, the staff, if you're okay with making that call on a case-by-case basis, we'll create the tool. But also make sure that's something that you all want to do as a council.
So let me ask John, and I'm not sure what the limit is, but I'm assuming something here. I'm assuming like Lowe's, Home Depot, Ace Hardwares, they all operate in C2, correct?
Yes, and there's a limited, and it has to be, that's for sale. They'll tell you, I think it has to be for sale, and it has a limited percentage of the area. Is that correct?
25?
20% of the parking area has to be for sale.
Okay, I'm not, but I guess my point is, we do allow some outside storage in C2 now, correct?
Right.
I mean, limited amount. And I'm assuming that the problem here is they're over the percentage and it kicks them into,
That and the employee limitation, number of employees you can have in a contractor's office. So those are two things that we'd have to fix with a special permit. I think you have no more than, I think it's 5 or 8 employees in a contractor's office as a use in a C2 zone. So it's a storage and number of employees issue.
okay, so I guess, and my question is, I'm always curious as where we come up with numbers. How did we come up with limiting to a number of 5 employees? Here again,
Right.
Lowe's, Home Depot, they're in a C2, they certainly have more employees. Now, I understand it's a little different mode of operation, but if it kind of looks the same, what's the difference? I guess what I'm saying, and maybe speaking to the council, I don't have a problem with reviewing it by case. If we need another tool in the toolbox to help us, if it's not quite yellow, but it hadn't turned over to orange,
Right.
where can we work somewhere in the middle,
And like I said, we're happy to develop that tool, also, as long as, if that's something, so what I don't want to do is, something we did the duplex special permit and never got approved. So as long as council as a whole is good with that, we'll do it.
Do you want some kind of raise of hand, or what
Yeah.
do you need? I'm good.
Confidence.
I'm good with a special permit. I don't know about everybody else.
Let me jump in here real quick, and I see Councilman Gilbert has his light on. Go ahead, Councilman.
John, when you say storage, are you referring to climate storage buildings that a C2 cannot have them on now, and they can if we go this route?
Outdoor storage, so we need help from my LDO folks.
Come on up.
Like mini storage. I'm talking about like people at the mini storage buildings they have.
Don't be shy.
I've got the statute too.
Come on down.
I think the difference is the contractors lay down in the yard. You can put scaffold, you can put scaffold boards, you can put material, you can put pile of gravel out there. You can store backhoes, bulldozers, trucks. Usually the retail, at least it's packaged and things go out in some reasonable amount of time. This stuff could stay there for years. And the difference there, it puts the limit on the manufacturing side of things, I think, that they want to do there. Where the C2, all those are sales employees. They're not manufacturing anything. They're just selling merchandise. So, but I think they want to use this to manufacture a symbol. And you could argue that they do some of that at Home Depot and Lowe's, but we mentioned that, we might need to look, they may actually be in a C4 zone though, because that's the big box retail zones that stuff really fits in, so I don't know. I was pulling that up to see, but that's the difference in outdoors, I think, in outdoor storage of sale, bags of mulch, stuff like that, things that come and go pretty quick where, we've all seen contractors' yards, some of them look very neat, Some of them look like a jumbled mess and stay that way day after day. So,
So you're saying outside storage, if there's a current building and it's a C2, that you cannot have outside storage, a lot of it,
you
correct?
can have outside storage, it's limited to 20%.
No, the parking
You
lot's
take a small
covered.
convenience store, that's a very limited place. You take Walmart, well, that's 150 spaces that would be 20% outdoor storage.
No, I'm
So-
speaking of a building that has, the whole parking lot has got junk, basically, in the C2 zone. Over there off, Old Governor's Lounge, off Bonnie Oaks.
I don't know, I have no idea where that zone
I'll get with you
Some-
later on.
Yeah, I think it was,
But this is just outside storage, not storage
we-
buildings.
we have been to the old governor's more than once, and I think that's zone, an M zone.
And I think Phil's going to address that question.
Yeah,
If I can, we good for a moment, Councilman
Yes.
Gilbert? Very good.
Yeah, currently, your zoning ordinance at 38-187 is the section that talks about prohibited things that you can have in the C2 zone. And that one says, like they were talking about, any outdoor storage is limited to 20% of the lot square footage, excluding the area where the buildings are located. So if they had a parking lot out there in front of it on there, it'd be 20% of that parking lot area. And it's also supposed to be contained within a fence that's at least 6 feet high, and it can't be in the parking area on here. So there's actually a formula that we have in the code right now defining how much outdoor storage you can have in a C2. And that's different in an M1. The C2 zone is trying to restrict the lot from not all being outdoor storage.
Thank you, Mr. Noblet. Councilman Henderson, I got your light again.
John?
Yes, sir.
Hit your light, hit that one. Go.
Now, maybe, there we go. Dallas brought up about the fact that they could, in a contractor's yard, they could lay down scaffolding, equipment, yada, yada, yada. Can we develop a special permit where you condition it to what you would be allowed to lay down?
Sure, you could develop that set of, and you could, but like I said, yes, you can. And it's, so like the question, do you lay that out in the standards, or do you allow it as part of the conditions that you would do in approving? Because sometimes you don't know every situation, right? You don't know every situation that comes before you.
Well, so, like in this situation, and I'm just going to, in general terms, they're going to construct light poles
Right.
and store them. They're not wanting to store their scaffolding or whatever out there. So if you could, somehow direct language that would give them a little bit of flexibility as far as, maybe not just limiting them to light poles, but whatever material that they're assembling in order to install.
So it's finished product as opposed to
Yes,
your equipment.
right. Yeah, that's correct.
Right.
So that would limit their ability to lay down scaffolding or to lay down,
Okay.
trenchers or whatever they have. They would just limit that outdoor storage to whatever it is that they're manufacturing or assembling to reinstall. Is it possible to develop language so that we're not,
Yeah,
getting
we-
a contractor's yard that looks like a mess?
We could certainly, and I guess what I'm looking for some affirmation from the body. What I'm hearing is what we're looking at doing would be a special permit tool in a C2 zone to allow some more flexibility on outdoor storage and contractors' uses on a case-by-case basis in the C2 zone. So that will be the tool that we're creating. And so I'm just, we'll make sure we're all understand
Very good.
that's something we want to do.
Well, come on,
Yeah.
now speak up. Well, tell him, if that's not what you want to do.
Chairman Smith.
Thank you, sir. John, your recommendation of doing this, yes or no?
Staff was no.
Yeah, I'm kind of a no too. I appreciate the idea of us trying to come up with ways that we can make sure that we're servicing everybody, taking care of both our residents and, businesses and companies that are wanting to move. But I've seen a lot of different special exception permits come up here, and there's always something, there's always seems to be some kind of gotcha on the tail end of this. So, me personally, I'm not really interested in creating something with the level of flexibility that everybody can come in and say, well, what about tweaking this and tweaking this? And, next thing you know, Councilman Gilbert has a whole lot of warehouse storage in his district, which he loves so much. So I'm thinking we need to come up with a better solution, and that solution may simply be this location does not work. Not every location is going to work for every kind of business. That's why we have zoning in the first place. So that's just my thought. But again, I got grown, so I didn't get to hear all of the comments on both sides of the argument last night. So I kind of had to defer to my colleague to get the feedback there, and I do appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. That was entertaining. Councilman Gilbert?
Councilman Ken Smith is correct, but lease is better than love shacks.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and cut this off before it gets too personal. Does anybody else have a comment that they would like to make in regards to this? We've heard from Councilman Gilbert, we've heard from Chairman Smith and Councilman Henderson. I think there's 1, 2, 3 more that we haven't heard from, if they wish to make a comment on this. Okay?
So again, all we would ask is, because it's a tool, it's a citywide tool, it'd be good if we're going to do it, to make sure that there's some level of consensus on council to do it. Otherwise, we create a tool that doesn't get applied.
All right.
So that's what we're looking for.
Okay. Before we move on to the next item, John, I'm probably going to have to agree with Chairman Smith and the staff. I feel like that's a very slippery slope once we start issuing all these and thousands of conditions. Enforcement-wise, I think it's an absolute nightmare. And so I will just lean in that direction personally.
Okay.
I have no other lights on this item. If you want to move on to G, please.
Okay. All right, this is on Davidson Road in District 4. This is a request to rezone a piece of property from R1 to RTZ residential townhouse zone for a single-family detached residential development. I'll call it small lot detached residential. Okay. As you can see this location, you can zoom in a little closer. It is adjacent to a substation to the east. There's also a townhouse development further to the east. You see to your right. You might recall in the past we approved an R4 for a, here's a picture of the site. I'm going to show you the zoning map. We approved an R4 just to the west of this property for a bed and breakfast development. That was in 2017. So now we have a request again to rezone this to RTZ for that development. There is no adopted land use plan for this area. However, the comp plan is something we consult when there's not a land use plan. It shows it as a level 1 and level 2, and simply what that means is there's not a great amount of transportation infrastructure. As we know, Davidson Road, while it is in the process of being improved, it currently has some challenges in terms of flooding. Also, there's a significant part of this site has floodplains. I'll show you this map here. You see the darker blue, which actually almost a good portion of the site is in the floodplain. They are proposing, as part of the site plan, to preserve most of that floodplain. It's undeveloped. You see the portion that's going to be developed in the upper right-hand corner. They're proposing a total of 126 small lot residential detached units with this concept. The rest of the property to the south would be preserved as open space. Staff, again, as you know, we're looking at this, we're not looking at a development, we're looking at a zone. And so I'm looking at the rezoning requests and also the overall development pattern of this area. If you look at, particularly as you transition further west from this property, it's large lot residential development. So staff is concerned about the precedence of an RTZ zone at this location. Also, this would be, again, transitioning more of this area to small lot residential development, which has not happened historically. So staff recommend denial because it was inconsistent with the comp plan recommendations. and again, the concern about establishing a precedent for higher density residential development adjacent to lower density residential. So we recommend to deny. At Planning Commission, let me look at my notes.
John, I think your slide is incorrect.
As I was looking at that.
There was no opposition to my memory.
Okay.
There was Mr. Clay who spoke in favor
Okay.
of this.
My apologies on that.
It's okay.
But Planning Commission basically concurred to approve the request, although a different zone, instead of RTZ, they recommended RZ1, with the condition of being no more than 110 dwelling units. All right, I'll leave it at that.
Very good. I see no lights. This obviously is in my district. To date, this might be hold the record for the most meetings held on a piece of property that I've been involved in since holding office. This is a very complex piece. There's a public-private partnership involved with this particular case, including stormwater runoff detention and conservation easement, the public-private partnership. Multiple meetings were held with residents along Davidson Road, which we all know is in extremely bad shape. Right, Stacy? Right, Chief? Yeah, right. She's here. She's listening. And in conjunction with Phase 1, that is on the books, and in the paving bid contracts, Phase 2, part of this project involves the design by the developer for Phase 2. So there's a lot of moving parts with this. And you would think that this would be an automatic no. There was a compromise made at 110 units at Planning Commission, which I think was fair. Multiple meetings held, as I mentioned before, and the neighbors seem very encouraged by the progress that we're making on Davidson Road. The movement of stormwater is a very important part of this project. So what came out of those meetings and why there was no opposition was a favorable recommendation by the community. And therefore, I just wanted to add those side notes.
Sure, thank you.
Sure. I see no other lights and questions for this, so if we would like to move on,
Sure.
we will hit item H, please.
Yes, this is a request to rezone a piece of property off of 6250 Shalford Road. This is in District 6. I think it's noted the caption's wrong there. It should be 6.
Yeah, I think this is in your district, Dr. Burrs. Thank you, ma'am.
Basically from R4 to C5 to accommodate some retail uses in a restaurant as part of an overall commercial development. Again, note this is not the entire site. Let me go to the zoning map. So you can see the back portion of the site to the south is currently zoned R4. The front portion they're wanting to rezone to C2 to accommodate a mixed commercial office development. I'll show you the site plan. On the front, they're proposing two commercial buildings. One would have some general commercial retail. One portion of it is proposed for a restaurant. The back half, or two-thirds, I should say, of the site would be office uses. So they're needing the commercial C5 to be able to accommodate the retail and restaurant uses in the front. As you can see from this site plan, they're proposing to have one point of access on Shalford Road on the top of the screen, another additional secondary access on Hickory Valley Road. I said that's a good thing in terms of access management. You don't see this a lot where you've actually got the potential to get from point A to point B without getting on a major road. So I think there's definitely a benefit to having 2 points of access on 2 major roads servicing this development. Staff did have some concerns in looking at this request in terms of the depth of the landscaping up front and the placement of parking. Staff, again, looking at the desire to not have a lot of exposed surface parking in the front, recommended actually putting it to the side or rear. As you'll see in our staff recommendation, staff felt like the C5 neighborhood commercial zone, it does represent a deviation from the original 2005 land use plan recommendation, which was for office use. But this property, if you recall, if I go back to the zoning map, give me a second here. The property on the corner was already zoned to C2, so you've got some precedent for commercial zoning, and it's real close to this intersection. Staff felt like a C5 is a good way to transition from that more intensive C2 zone at that intersection to C5 further to the west. Again, which is a more C5, as you know, is a more limited commercial use. You don't have, you can't have drive-throughs. You're limited in terms of the square footage. You only have 5,000 square foot building size, whereas C2 lets you have any, as long as you meet your setbacks, doesn't have any limits on your building footprint size. So we feel like that's a transition. It also represents, if you look at the site plan, at least as a way of creating more integrated development with what's going on Hickory Valley Road and create some cross access. So staff recommended approval with some conditions, and that was to be sure the building height would be limited to 2.5 stories or 35 feet, that there be a 25-foot landscape buffer along the front. And the basis for that is there's the existing convenience store next door has that size of buffer. So staff was recommending a similar buffer to maintain that, again, that green space along that street frontage, since you are adjacent to a neighborhood. And again, that parking will be located to the side or rear of the buildings instead of the front, as they propose on their site plan. At Planning Commission, there was no opposition. So after hearing from staff's report and the comments from the applicant, you can see they did not include all 3 of staff's recommendations. They only recommended the height limitations. They took away the buffer requirement and the parking location requirement. There are 2 differences from what Planning Commission recommended and staff.
Very good. Dr. Burrs?
Thanks, John. There were 2 meetings on this, and there is no opposition to it.
Okay.
The only concerns come with, they do want the landscape buffer. The input that we got at the meetings. The project itself is fine.
Okay.
But the landscape buffer is important. And so the feeling was they wanted that back in.
Okay.
Go back to the other conditions you had about the parking. Parking located to the side or rear of the building. The developer didn't want that at all. He wanted the parking in the front. There was a lot of discussion. It didn't make much difference to the people one way or the other. So let me ask you about this.
Sure.
I agree with condition 1. I agree with condition 2. The landscape buffer of 25 feet shall be required. The parking, what kind of a precedent does it set? Because that area is going, that side of the road particularly. Talk to me about that.
Nuance to that. I think the problem with having an excessive amount of surface parking in the front, it's not very walkable. And I know most people do drive from point A to point B. If you're a resident living in the area and you want to just walk recreationally, having, a large surface parking lot, it just discourages folks from using that mode of choice. What I've seen other places do as a way to kind of compromise in the middle is you allow some parking in the front, but not 2 or 3 bays of parking. It may be a single bay of parking. So you still have that immediate convenient parking in the front, but it's not all the parking. And so you have at least some more of an address of the building on the street. So it's also easier if you're walking to that destination. Instead of going through 3 bays of parking to get to the front door, you only have 1 bay of parking. I've seen that used as a way, and I'll give you an example. If you've been to, this is in District 4, the, off of Gumbel Road, the new, where they got the barbecue, Mission Barbecue. It's a similar situation. They have a small amount of surface parking in front, but a lot of it's behind
in the
it.
back.
So you get some of that up front, but you're not killing, I'm going to use the word killing the street. When you get all that surface parking, it's a different kind. It's definitely highly auto-driven at that point.
Have you approached that at all with the developer?
Be honest, no. It just kind of hit me as you were talking about that as an interim. So maybe I can try to reach out to the developer between now and next week.
If you would,
Sure.
Nobody was against the development, okay? The only concerns had to do with traffic on Shallowford, but I think that's been taken care of by the two entrances. I just know that you've got this creeping development down Shallowford Road, and it's got to look right. It's got to look good. And I'm thinking that if you could come up with a compromise and talk with Mr. Sanders about it.
Sure.
Because otherwise, I think I would like all three conditions. And that's what I'll push for. However, because it doesn't hurt them at all.
Right.
However, I'd love a compromise.
Sure. I'll talk to him about it.
So if you could talk with him, that would be great, because I think he's going to be setting the precedent for what keeps going down that road. And we want to protect the integrity of the neighborhoods as well. So if you would speak with him, that would be great.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Burrs. Councilman Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Almost got answered, but I just want to go a little bit further. And you might not have an answer for this. It might just be speculation on your part, but how do we go from 3 recommendations by staff? What was the thought process during the meeting for the Planning Commission to just cut 2 of these recommendations out and keep 1, especially the buffer part,
Right.
parking? Maybe, what was the thought process there?
Well, I quite frankly, the applicant just didn't, they asked the applicant their feedback, and I think basically the applicant said we're good with the first one, but not the second 2, as I recall. Now, actually, to be honest, I don't think I was at this PC. I was out. My wife's had her surgery. This is I was not there, so I have to review the minutes. I can talk to staff and find out. I believe that's typically how it, not always, but I've seen that times they'll ask the applicant, do any of these conditions have concern? Which ones do you? And then they'll think about whether or not to amend what staff's recommendation based on the feedback they're hearing from the applicant.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Good, sir?
Yeah, I guess.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I think John pretty much summed it up. I don't really have anything to add to it. That was kind of an interesting motion made by, I believe it was Mr. Payne is who made that motion, but it was to remove conditions. If my memory serves me correctly. Yep, I'm good. If memory serves correctly. You can check the minutes on that.
We'll get it worked out by next week.
Very good. Thank you. Seeing no other lights. Aye, please.
Yes, this is a request, again, in District 7, to rezone a piece of property from DRM4 to DCX6 to allow for a building of a proposed parking garage and multi-story structure. They need the rezoning to accommodate both the height and the use. I'm going to go ahead and jump to the site plan so you can see what's being proposed. As you can see, these are the former Provident parking lots. So they're proposing to put some new development on these former surface parking lots. You can see they'll have some outbuilding or some buildings fronting 3rd Street, and they need the CX designation to allow surface parking as a part of the development and to accommodate the proposed height of the structures. So again, I just also want to point as an example of, again, the form-based code is zoning like any other zone. You can rezone it to other things, just like any other zoning district in the city. In this case, they're, again, requesting rezone from DRM4 to DCX6 to accommodate their proposed development program on this location. As you can see, you already have D, which remember, D stands for the downtown context. CX means commercial mix uses, and 6 is the indication of the maximum height. You've already got some precedent for 6-story maximums just to the immediate south of this property. So there's already some precedent for that. I think the other keynote is 3rd Street is a major street going through. It really divides the CBD district from the riverfront. So in reviewing this request, let me go to staff's comments. You've already got some three-story structures to the north of this property. You've got, of course, the Provident office building to the south. So you've already got some multi-story structures in this area. Staff did not have any concern with this proposal. So we felt it was compatible with the development, with the adopted plan, particularly for redeveloping a surface parking lot and creating a building which is going to help animate the street and add value to Third Street corridor. We felt like the proposed height is consistent with the maximum height of 75 feet allowed in the DCX 6 zone. So staff recommended approve. We didn't have any issues with this. Why does Brian have this? My poor guy. I will. I don't believe there's any opposition.
I don't believe there were any opposition.
So my apologies. That slide is wrong. I will correct that between now and next week. Planning Commission determined is consistent with the proposed development form area and to approve. There was no opposition.
Very good. I have one light. Councilman Mitchell, please.
You got something? You sure? Okay, so when we put this thing together, DCM4 was thought to be the right thing.
Yep.
And I'm assuming that's create transition.
Yes.
Okay, what happened? Why do
Well-
we not need transition anymore?
Well, you've got, you certainly, when you initially, yes, when you're originally proposing it, you would look at that as a way to ensure there's adequate transition between, you're right, between the 6 and the 4. My point would be, though, that you've got Third Street, which serves as, yes, that's a large right-of-way. So going from 6 to 4 at that juncture is not an issue. It'd be different if you had that property immediately butting, you know, a smaller, and I would say also how much transition, right? If you're going from 6 to 4 is one thing, but let's say if you're going from 6 to 2 is another. So to me, the difference between 4 and 6 is not that significant. To be a concern.
Thanks.
And I'm gonna double check the minutes on the PC regarding opposition. I did see some notes. Our staff has, I'm just gonna, and I usually don't make excuses, but I do it. We've been really slammed with a number of zoning cases, and so I got this late, and I'll do some more QC before next week, make sure we get that slide corrected. My apologies on that.
Thank you, John. I know y'all are working hard.
Um,
I do have another light, though, if you don't mind. Councilman Oglesby, are you ready?
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
Okay, John, it's some things I just want to get a sidebar with you when you start looking at
Yes.
back on your minutes to get some
Sure.
clarifications, plus it's some other things I want to look into prior to next
Sure.
week. So I
Be
just
happy
wanted to put that on your horizon.
Will do.
Okay,
Make a
thank
note.
you.
Very
Thank you,
good.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. I'm seeing no other lights. If we will move on to item J, please.
I think the other thing that's throwing me off is I was not here at Planning Commission, so I don't know. So I'll double check the minutes.
We did miss you, John.
All right. That's what's throwing me off. Okay, this is a request to rezone a portion of a lot from C2 Convenience Commercial to UGC General Commercial for a 12 townhouse apartment development. I do know that part of this site was already rezoned to UGC. I'm gonna go to the zoning map. So you can see just to the south of this property was already zoned UGC. They need to rezone this remaining portion to basically have a more comprehensive development for the entire site. This is located near the intersection of Main and Central, about a block and a half away. Let me go to the site plan so you can see that. Here the site plan shows they're proposing to have a townhouse development on this property. They'll be fronting both Fagan Street and is that Month Street to the south. You can see there's a curb cut proposed coming off of Central and, I'm going to go back to that. Yeah, off of Central and Fagan Street, or the alley to the rear. You can see the zoning pattern is already some precedence for UGC in this area. So we don't see this as a new zone in this location. You have already some precedence for UGC in this area. So staff, in reviewing the request, found the proposal is compatible with the adjacent land uses. You've already got some precedence for UGC in the area and townhouse development. So staff felt the proposal was consistent with the recommendations of the comprehensive plan. It is an extension of an existing zone, not a new zone, and it's compatible with the adjacent land use, so staff recommended to approve. There was no opposition at Planning Commission. The Planning Commission basically concurred with staff's recommendation to approve this request.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Bridger. I'm seeing no lights, so we will move on to K.
All right.
Maybe. Councilman, you good?
Okay. This, you ready?
I think we're ready, John. Go ahead.
All right. This is in District 9, in the Glass Street community. Request to rezone a portion of a lot from C2 Convenience Commercial to UGC Urban General to accomplish an apartment development of 12 apartments. As you can see, the site is currently vacant. You do have a commercial structure to the west. You do have some residential structures to the east, but it's kind of like in a vacant lot between an existing commercial, traditional commercial building and residential to the east. Here's a picture of the site. Looking in, currently vacant. As you can see, the property is already zoned C2, so it's not like we're changing to a commercial zone. Basically, they're needing the C2 to accomplish the density and placement of buildings they're trying to accomplish on the site to be consistent, again, to better match the existing form of the area. The Avondale Land Use Plan recommends medium business mix for this site. So again, that includes your commercial type zones, which they're requesting a UGC. As you can see on this site plan, they're proposing a one curb cut with 4 structures along this site. I will say with UGC, they're probably going to need to move the one you see to the further to the south. It's going to need to come probably closer to the street because UGC has the 0 to 15-foot setback, so they'll probably need to place that structure closer to comply with that zone. But again, as you can see in this site plan, it'd be one curb cut to accommodate the proposed 12 units. Staff felt like the proposal was compatible with the adjacent land uses, and that was in between an existing commercial building and residential to the east. The form, again, you've already got some precedence with commercial structures and single-family structures, so you've got a mix of structures. So the staff did not feel like that was inconsistent with the pattern of the area. So we felt like the zoning change was compatible with the adopted area plan, which recommended medium business mix, also with the compatible with the adjacent land uses and the varying types of development form found in the area. So we recommend to approve. Again, no conditions were needed because we felt like, again, the UGC standards really police what gets built on the site. There was some opposition to this request, and I'm going to look at my notes on that. The notes indicated that there was concern about there really is not a need for additional housing. The need is for commercial dislocation. They would, again, the concern was the need for more reuse of commercial buildings, not more residential. So that was kind of some of the comments that were received at the meeting. After hearing from staff's comments and the comments from the public and the applicant, Planning Commission concurred with staff's recommendation to approve.
Thank you, John. I am seeing no lights, but I can say that I think we will have more conversation on this case. Councilwoman Coonrod, I think, has been in contact with some of the opposition, and I think we'll hear more about this next week. And wish she was here to share that with us, but completely understand.
All right. The
All
last
right.
one is a resolution.
Resolutions E, yep.
And this is a planned unit development request on Beeson Drive to accommodate a single-family detached residential small lot development. Again, I'll just go ahead and jump to the site plan to show you that. This is another one on a steep slope. It's got some steep slopes on it. Not as prevalent as some other locations. We did do a site walkabout with Councilman Henderson on this site. Most of your steep slopes are either right at the front street, Beeson Drive itself, or the other side of the property. But it does ride a ridge crest, as you can see on this slide here. And it's also prominently visible from Highway US 27, I should say. As you can see from these images. This is the road, Beeson Drive. It is a small lane accessing this property, so there more than likely there would need to be some improvements to Beeson Drive as this site is developed. You can see, again, it's fairly steep right off the road, but then it kind of, it's I'll call it more of a moderate slope condition, rising up to the crest of the hill. And then on the back side is where you have a lot of your I'll call your 30% great. Again, you can see here from the photos what that looks like. The property is currently zoned R2, so I think it's important to understand that it's already zoned R2, which allows, you could do a duplex development by right on this property. And again, they're asking for a PUD, not a rezoning. We recently approved an RTZ zoning request just to the south of this property for a townhouse development with some conditions to help protect the steep slopes of the site. So there is some precedent for doing that. Here is the site plan that was submitted. It shows one point of access coming off of Beeson Drive and basically going up to the, pretty much the crest of the hill, although they would probably need to lower the hill a little bit to make this work. And you see the road running along the spine with 2 cul-de-sacs on either end. They're proposing to basically build 55 lots total. 52 of those would be residential lots, an overall density of 4.4 dwelling units per acre. R2 by right, you could get 44 lots or 81 duplexes. I say 41 lots or 81 duplexes because, you know, each lot could have 2 structures. So by right, you could get about 81 units on this property. There is no area plan for this location, but the comp plan shows this as having both level 1, which is the least potential for development, that's for those steep slope areas, and level 5. That's probably because of the presence of US 27, which has the most potential. So it's kind of in between. You've got steep slopes on this property, but you also have it's real close to the US 27 corridor. Although I would argue Beeson Drive is not the most improved road in the world, right? It needs some work. In terms of compatibility with adjacent land uses, it's currently, I mean, the zoning is not consistent with the existing development pattern. While it's zoned R2, the development pattern, I would call it middle to large size lots. You're looking at quarter to half acre lots is the existing development pattern on this site. Again, there hasn't been a lot of development historically on this area, so this would set some precedent, again, for a change to a little more intensive form of development than has historically been the case. But again, be mindful, we just recently approved an RTZ zoning request just to the south of the site. When staff looked at this, our concern had to do with how, usually when you use a PUD tool, you're using it to either show some new technique, approach to development, or you're trying to help protect a public resource, right? In this situation, it wasn't clear in looking at this site plan, what is the value add of using a PUD tool? Because if you look at this PUD plan, you can see it's pretty much the entire site is carved up with lots. You do have some residual open spaces on the back side of the property that are being protected, but as you can see, most of this site would be cleared to accommodate this development. We did have a on-site meeting and walk through with the applicant. I'm going to give some of my observations, and Councilman Henderson can also add in. I think the potential for, I think you got to keep a couple things in mind. One, it's zoned R2 now. So in some ways, the damage has been done in the sense that it's probably should have never been zoned R2, but it is what it is. It's currently zoned R2. The second thing I would say is the potential benefit of a PUD is it does allow flexibility in setbacks and how you arrange your uses so that you can protect the hillside while accommodating some development. I think what remains to be seen, and what I think we've asked the applicant to do, and they haven't gotten a site plan to me yet, is we would like to see a revised site plan that shows how they could have more undisturbed area as a result of doing a PUD tool. And I think their to-do is to submit some kind of a drawing that shows, hey, if we position our houses closer to the street, if we do possibly, the other idea that we discussed was doing detention in the street, right? And some other things, how can that get us to the goal of accommodating some development without completely impacting this entire hillside? And I think that's the homework assignment. I think we're waiting to hear back from the applicant on what they've come up with.
Good, John. Councilman, this is in Councilman Henderson's district, but I see our city attorney wanted to chime in, so he's graciously allowed to have Phil go first.
Just real requesting a little bit of guidance on what you want us to do for next week, because there was a concern, I guess, initially about some type of resolution to deal with steep slopes on here. And this is a situation where there's not been a site approval. Normally, when you're dealing with a PUD,
Right.
planned unit development is only one time on there that it's heard by resolution on here. Is this something that you would also want us to consider in that regard when we're making recommendations?
I'm glad you brought that up because I was just reading over 3835 and wondering the same question. So how far along are we in the process with what we're looking at on this particular project?
I believe that generally whenever there is site plan approval, then
Right.
you can't do anything about it until that occurs, and that's
Right.
an issue.
Very good. Thank you very much.
But just a thought, I mean, if we're, it'd be interesting just, I mean, if you attach, again, there's no floodplain here, so it'd be just a 20% disturbance of, most, as I understand it, it'd be interesting again to look at a more detailed site map. Most of this site is under 30%. The only 30% portion of slope I would think would be right along Beeson Drive, and again, the backside of this property. It'd be interesting if we could, I guess, follow the applicant and say, if council is considering this 20% limit on steep slope grading, then you need to show us revised site plan that complies with that, right? So, I mean, I could just convey that to the applicant.
I'll let Councilman Henderson address that. Are you through, Mr. Attorney? Very good. Councilman Henderson.
So, John, and I think as we talked, even on site, we're probably going to have to defer this just a little while longer. Basically, we're waiting on them to get us sort of a revised site drawing, and then we'd like to have a community meeting before we bring it back to council, just
Okay.
to make sure we got all of our I's dotted and T's crossed. And I think probably the biggest concern right now is from the neighborhood that would be on the backside of this property, which that's where the, as you said, the 30% of the steep slopes is. That is one thing that I was interested to find out from them, and you said they haven't submitted anything yet, is to see if they were going to be able to salvage or save the 80% of the steep slopes in this development, to see if that formula would work with what we're thinking right now with this interim measure that we're going to look at.
I'll follow up with the applicant.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Councilman, and appreciate your work on thinking about steep slopes and floodplains as we move forward. Appreciate staff's hard work on this. We have one other item under planning. It is a SEP for a partial change in ownership for liquor store in District 4. Seeing no questions on that item. Does anybody have any other business we need to cover in planning and zoning today? If not, I will adjourn us to 4.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, Jerry,